The human body is a unique and complex structure made up of billions of smaller structures, over 70 organs, and more than 10 different organ systems, all working together to keep us alive. Sometimes things go wrong in one of these structures, causing illness or disease. Depending on the problem, our bodies may be able to heal themselves, or medication can assist, but there are times when the structural damage is too significant. In these cases, an implantable medical device may be able to replace structures or parts of a system in the body that are no longer functioning correctly. These devices are becoming more common, and they are gradually becoming more customizable with advances in science and technology. And that is what we will be discussing today in this episode of Science and Society. Hi, I'm your host, Sabrina Taylor. Welcome to Arizona State University's first episode of Science and Society. We are discussing what you need to know about the personalization of medical implant technology. Producer David Zaragoza is joining me today to talk more about this. Hi, David.
Hi, Sabrina. Thanks for having me.
Can you start by telling me what a medical implant is?
Of course. So that's a great question, A medical implant is any device that supports, enhances, or totally replaces part or an entire biological structure. These can be totally or partially placed within the body. They can be made out of metal, polymer, ceramic, living tissue, or some combination of all of those materials.
Living tissue. So does that mean that an organ transplant would be considered a medical implant? I mean, when you hear the word device, you usually think something artificial, maybe mechanical.
Yeah, it can be both, Technically, the donor organ, whether it be a skin graft, an entire heart, or something in between, it's considered an implanted device because it's an object that's foreign to the recipient's body. And cardiac implants are some of the most common, and the ones that I find most interesting are valve replacements. The heart has 4 valves that help regulate the circular flow of blood throughout the heart and the body. And unfortunately, sometimes these valves develop issues. And according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, heart valve disease affects 2.5% of the U.S. population. It wasn't until the middle of the last century that the invention of the heart and lung machine made open heart surgery possible. It was a collaboration of a surgeon from Columbia University and an experienced engineer that created the first commercially available mechanical replacement valve in 1957. In response, some experts believe that these biological valves would work better, and just a few years later, teams of biochemists and engineers developed a prosthesis using the heart valves from pigs. Over the next half century, advances in chemistry, engineering, biology, and surgical techniques have resulted in the valves we use today, which are still made up of metal, porcine, or bovine tissue.
Wait, porcine or bovine?
Yeah.
You mean that if I need one of my heart valves replaced, you could take one from a pig or a cow and place it in me? Does that even work?
Incredibly, it does. In fact, about half of the prosthetic valves that we use today are biological, usually from pigs. And earlier this month, I spoke to Dr. Tony Chow about this. He's an infectious disease specialist in Vancouver, Canada, and he's followed this technology for several decades.
The reason pigs are picked because their immunology is most like the human, so there's less of a problem with rejection, for example. The tissue valves are nicer. You don't need to use anticoagulation continuously, but the valve deteriorates and may need to be replaced every now and then.
Wow, David, these technologies sound amazing, but it also sounds like there might be some downsides.
Yeah. Absolutely. Whether you get a mechanical or biological valve, these replacement valves with current technological capabilities will sometimes fail to be as good as the original. Scientists are working towards a solution that is dynamic in the sense that it is more like original tissue that can change and remodel itself in response to changes in the body. Because of that, there's a few issues with prosthetic valves. The first is that these surgeries are incredibly costly, right? And this issue kind of becomes more exacerbated in developing countries. Secondly, replacement valves come in no more than 3 predetermined sizes. And these are selected based on what the hospital has in stock and a rough eyeballing estimate for which will fit the patient. And understandably, sometimes these new valves leak because they're too rigid or they're too loose. So your condition might only be partially remedied, and you might be swapping one problem for another. I spoke to Dr. Chow about this, and he says that doctors are trying to address these issues.
Certainly, it's getting more and more personalized. Even now, the cardiologist and the heart surgeon would consider the individual patient carefully to make decisions, what is the best approach to take. But looking in the future, they're trying to even make it more personal by for example, simulating and taking measurements, precise measurements by MRI or CT or other imaging measures, so you can get a precise configuration of the heart valve in its natural state, and then try to find replacements that are as close to or adapted to the native valve as much as possible, in the hopes of improving function.
So improving this technology means being able to personalize this for a patient, which I understand you looked into this, and I was curious, what did you find out?
A lot, actually. And like you said, any improvements to prosthetic valves take the combined effort of a lot of people to make it happen. So to understand this, I spoke to Justin Ryan. He's a biomechanical engineer with a digital art background who is working on the cutting edge of precision cardiology. While at school at ASU, Ryan became interested in the idea of creating 3D models from patient images like CT scans. He joined a team of professionals at ASU and Phoenix Children's Hospital to figure out a practical process for 3D printing exact models of a patient's heart. Wow. He described some of the logistics of this project in our conversation.
And it was kind of my process as a student to figure out how we could operationalize 3D printing at Phoenix Children's Hospital. So that entailed the process of getting medical images, figuring out how to get it out of their system, bring it into a secondary software, doing the 3D modeling, and then bringing that to a 3D printer. But then also closing the loop. How do we operationalize bringing a 3D print into the care systems?
Ryan's work is a great example of the kind of multidisciplinary team that is needed to create innovation in cardiac technology.
So, okay, advances in technology, especially the falling costs of computer modeling, they're making it possible to radically tailor these treatments to every individual.
But this is all still pretty experimental. Because each case is so unique, Ryan hasn't been able to design a study that could effectively evaluate actual results. So while they suspect these models help shorten procedure times and the trauma that a patients endure, they can't even yet say for sure. Also, these procedures vary widely from hospital to hospital, depending on the resources, and insurance doesn't yet reimburse for these methods. So while Ryan's program is privately funded and pretty advanced, some hospitals may have just one cardiologist using a desktop 3D printer. All this new development prompted researchers at the National University of Singapore to conduct a systematic review of innovations like Ryan's, and they specifically considered applications of this technique to valve replacements. What they found is that these cutting-edge technologies are attempting to address major problems with today's prosthetics, but also that there is little consistency in approaches and a pressing need for clinical trials to identify what is working and what is not.
Right. New medical technologies tend to be rapidly adopted and lightly regulated. I spoke to Rizwan Virk about our tendency toward positive perception in medical technology. He has a degree from MIT in computer science and electrical engineering, and he's currently doing research at ASU Center for Science and the Imagination.
I think to a certain extent, science fiction, which I'm a big fan of, has influenced us the wrong way about medicine and technology. In Star Trek, right, when the doctor, they go in and they just give you the injection, you're done. Nobody has side effects. Nobody has a problem because of the medical treatment.
Even the Food and Drug Administration has fallen victim to this kind of technological optimism. The FDA is the agency that's tasked with regulating medical implants, and it tries to balance the support of innovation with practicing patient safety. Numerous critics that were recently cited in an article released by the American College of Cardiology, they've pointed out that medical implants are not subject to the same safety monitoring criteria as drugs and vaccines, and valve replacements specifically aren't even required to undergo clinical trials. Rather, the FDA accepts a much more limited standard called Objective Performance Criteria, or OPC, to show a device is safe. Proponents of this method point out that OPCs are much faster, they require less patients to be involved in the study, and they're sufficient to identify any safety concerns. But critics remind us that clinical trials are still the gold standard and are necessary to accurately evaluate the safety and the efficiency of these complex new technologies.
Whew. Well, David, it sounds like this technology is pretty complex and there's still a lot of discussion happening around it. And if our viewers want to join in that conversation, how can they do that?
Great question. So one way is to leave comments, contribute to the discussion, and let us know what they think and if they want to learn more. And because of that, we're listing all the information we cited in our show notes.
Well, that's all from us today. Thanks, David.
Thank you, Serena.
And thank you, viewers, for joining us for this first episode of Science and Society.